Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Cecile McGuire. I am the Associate Director North America for the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Queensland. Thank you for joining our webinar, where we're going to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, Australia's river city, Brisbane. And we've got some current medical students who will be joining us to tell you about their experience of life in Brisbane. And obviously, I'll be able to talk to you from my perspective as a Canadian Australian who's lived in Brisbane now for many years. But before I introduce our student speakers, I wanted to address quite an important topic that some people are calling the elephant in the room, and that is the question of what class is going to look like in 2021. Short answer is we don't know yet. We are planning for all possibilities, whether it's online or face-to-face teaching or a combination. What I can tell you is that our leadership team are working incredibly hard at making sure that we are going to be able to safely welcome students into Australia. And our preferred option is obviously for you to be able to come on campus to study in 2021. We don't yet know when we'll be able to have a decision on our proposal. Once we have any more updated information, we'll communicate that to all of our applicants. So if you have not already done so, please make sure that you go to our website and opt in for our newsletter, because that's where we will communicate any updated information. I'm going to introduce our student speakers now. We've got some prepared topics that we want to talk to you about, but please feel free to use the chat option to send through any questions, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible in the allotted hour that we have. We have Kathy Kwan, who is joining us. She's the International Officer of UQMS, which is our medical student leadership group. We have Rosie Stoke, who is the president of UQMS, and Cynthia Taylor, who is representing our Ochsner students. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about themselves. And Kathy, I'm going to start with you, please.
Hi, I'm currently halfway through my second year at UQ. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and I did a Bachelor's of Science major in biochem at the University of British Columbia. Took a year and a half off to travel and work, and then moved halfway across the globe to pursue medicine. That's me.
And so, Kathy, it might not be as big a climate shock for someone coming from Vancouver, but how would you rate Brisbane's winter?
It's gorgeous. I'm cold in the mornings and evenings because I've acclimatized to the beautiful weather that we have here, but I currently have a blanket wrapped around me. I was walking around in a t-shirt and shorts the other day and just marveling at the clear blue sky and the 22-degree winter weather. So it's pretty good.
Thank you. And Cynthia, can I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your journey to medicine?
Yeah, so I'm Cynthia. I graduated from Stanford in 2017, and I spent a couple years working at a biotech as a quality director. I did not do a lot of med in undergrad or at that job, so it was a transition into my first year med here, but it's going pretty well after I settled in a bit. So yeah, I'm just in my second semester of my first year right now, and yeah, I really like living in Brisbane. I was in California pretty much the entire time before, and Brisbane is very similar.
Great. And Cynthia, have you had any interesting encounters with any Australian wildlife? And in that, I would include spiders and also local Australians.
Yeah, so spiders, they're very friendly. Not too many are going to get you, but I did a trip to Cairns over the inter-semester break with a really good group of friends. And we went on this hike, and we were going along, and there's like a nice sunny spot. We were kind of looking at it, and the sunny spot moved, and it was this python. And we had about 6 people and then 3 guys, and I never heard them get to that level, but the snake was very friendly. Just wanted to say hi.
Thank you very much. And Rosie, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosie, and as was said, I'm the president of the Medical Student Society for this year. I'm the token Aussie on the panel, or Australian Aussie as we would say here. And I moved to Brisbane new to start medicine a few years ago. And I moved from Melbourne, where I did my undergrad and then did some work doing research. I'm a third-year student, but I'm doing an alternate pathway to do an MD, PhD in 6 years, which I'm happy to answer questions on as well. And that's me.
And Rosie, as someone who moved interstate to come to Brisbane, what's something, an important message, something you learned in your first days in Brisbane that you think would be useful for incoming international students?
I think the most important thing I learnt was how close the beautiful beaches were and how to get there on the train. I think some of Australia's best beaches are super close, and it's very important to get there as soon as you can when you arrive to get a bit of taste of the Australian culture.
Thank you. And spoken like a Victorian, because if you go to the beach in Queensland in the summer, usually the only people there are people from Victoria, because it's far too cold in our winter for Queenslanders to go swimming, but it doesn't stop any Victorians. Thank you very much. Our first topic is going to be accommodation, and I just wanted to sort of give an overview to students about some of the options that are available, and then I'll ask each of our student representatives to talk about their personal situation. I know in particular for a lot of students from North America, living on campus is quite common at your undergraduate institution. And just to give you an idea, there are residential colleges on campus at UQ. They have about 2,000 places in total, and we have an overall student population of in excess of 50,000. So you can see that the norm for Australian and international students at UQ is not to live on campus. A lot of the students that are in the residential colleges are first-year students. It's their first time away from home. They tend to be more from the rural regional centers of Australia and so on. It's an option that includes everything because they are all catered, and so the cost includes meal plans and so on. But the majority of students would live off campus. And we have an accommodation office at UQ that provides information and assistance to students that are looking to live off campus. But Kathy, I might ask you to talk about how you found your accommodation when you first got to Brisbane.
I was fortunate in that when I moved to Australia, I came with one of my close high school friends who also got accepted at the same time. So we moved into a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment off campus, but still in St. Lucia in our first year. And now we live in a 5-person house close to the hospital.
That's great. And Cynthia, you probably had the most recent experience of searching for accommodation. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found your current living arrangement?
Yeah, so I came out here a couple weeks early to give myself plenty of time to get to know the area and meet the fellow Austiners and Australians, just to see who would be a good roommate and like what we would both like. And so I highly recommend doing that, because some people came out like the day before classes started, and it was a little stressful. But yeah, it ended up working out pretty well. I used the Facebook group, messaged some people before, so when I got here, I already had some people I knew I was planning to meet. We could maybe live together. It worked out really well. I'm living in South Brisbane, where a lot of the Austiners decide to live. It's kind of a little more city, so it's a lot of fun for us. And I have a really great roommate, so we have a 2-bed, 2-bath as well. And yeah, so I had very close to the river, and if anybody's into cycling, that kind of stuff, we can just like go out of our apartment and hit the trail right there.
That's great, thank you. And Rosie, can you talk about your accommodation option, and maybe for the sake of this group, translate roommate into Australian?
I think we'd say housemate here, which is confusing to us that you say roommate because you don't actually share a room. So I think we're right. When I moved here, we're not as lucky as Australians who are moving into state in terms of having a database of new friends, essentially, which the Canadians and obviously the Americans have as well. So I moved into a 1-bedroom, which was pretty expensive, but you know, good way to sort of start and know where I was moving into when I pitched up a couple of days before the whole thing started. And then have since moved in with some other medical students into a 3-bedroom apartment, 2 Canadians and an American. So I'm biased.
That's great, thank you. I want to talk now about budgeting, living expenses, and so on. I mean, in terms of the Australian context, Brisbane is not the most expensive city in Australia. Sydney and Melbourne would be more expensive for living costs. But if I could, you know, keep with you, Rosie, did you notice a change in the cost of living? How, you know, do you budget for, you know, day-to-day stuff? And to just give an overview of living expenses.
Yeah, I think Brisbane is by far the cheapest of the major cities along the East Coast. So I grew up in Sydney, then did a couple of years in Melbourne and moved here. Sydney is almost prohibitively expensive, I would say. I think it's really, really hard to pay rent just to get around, to be living somewhere as close as all of us live in relation to university in the city. Melbourne too is more expensive than Brisbane, so I was very pleasantly surprised to move here and see the drop in rental costs. As we all do, sharing accommodation with other medical students obviously brings the price down. So I share with 3 other students. I share a room with my partner, and I spend about $550 on rent in a month. And this year, no one's been spending much money at all because we've not got anywhere to go. But yeah, I think working around sort of sharing expenses really helps.
Thank you. And Kathy, I might ask about your experience when you first came to Brisbane, how you adapted to the different cost of living from Vancouver.
Vancouver also has a pretty high cost of living. So I think moving here, it was a bit cheaper or comparable. I pay around $800 a month for rent. And then I budget around $400 to $600 for food and transport and extra things. I may have spent a little bit more during this COVID time on projectors and fun things. But yeah, I don't know. I just try to cook a bit more to save money on eating out because that's a bit more expensive than it would be back home.
Thank you. And Cynthia, what was your impression about prices when you first arrived here? How do you budget for cost of living?
Yeah, so before this, I was living in San Francisco. So Brisbane is excellent cost of living, very affordable in comparison. Yeah, so for me, I pay about $800 US per month, sorry, for both of us. So it's $400 US each per month for rent, and then food and stuff. It's very reasonably priced as well. I budget about maybe 100 to 200 a month for food, depending on how crazy I am with going out. But again, quarantine was very kind to my bank account. I got a lot more into cooking. But yeah, so if you're coming from California or any of those major cities, the exchange rate is very much in your favor.
And Kathy and Cynthia, I might ask you to speak from the international student perspective. Were there any unexpected costs or expenses that you weren't aware of before you arrived in Brisbane? Kathy, have you got any response?
I don't think there were too many unexpected. Oh, phone plans. Phone plans are so much cheaper here than back home. I think I have like 80 gigabytes of data for very, very cheap. I think like 40 or something. Anyways, that was unexpected in a good way.
Very good. Cynthia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, there were actually very few fees once we got here. I wasn't expecting that because when I went to undergrad, it seemed like every other week there's this fee for this, fee for that. And here it was all very straightforward. What you're going to pay was what you paid. So that was really nice. And then I saw there's a question in here about those living in South Brisbane about the ferry. So a guy in my case-based learning group, he does take the ferry every day to campus. It is a little bit longer, but he really loves it. So it's kind of nice.
I think the river ferries are a great way to get around, and whenever I have the opportunity to use public transport to go to the main campus, the ferry would be my preferred provider. But I'm always amazed at how many people sit inside like they're on a bus. So I think you're on a boat, really you want to be on the water, you know, with the wind in your hair. So I wanted to change to another topic now. We get a lot of questions from prospective students asking about how safe Brisbane is, and I think, you know, we could safely say, you know, we're not a major crime capital of Australia. We don't have the same, you know, level of population that you see in other cities that sometimes has a negative impact on crime and that. But I wonder, Rosie, could you maybe talk about some of the, you know, health and safety, the ways that UQ addresses sort of health and safety issues on campus?
Absolutely. I think we all talk a lot about health of medical students, and it's definitely something that's very important to me and important to me in my role within the student society. I think medical school is quite challenging. I hope that's not a surprise to anyone. And when you first start, there's a pretty steep learning curve just for school, and then a very high proportion of our sort of student body is also trying to move to a new city, make new friends, sort of set up that support network. And that's quite a lot to be tackling. And I think a big message that we try and push both the faculty of medicine and the sort of student support network is that you can't succeed in any of those endeavors unless you're your most sort of physically and mentally well self. So that there's a lot of ways that the university and that we try to facilitate that in terms of really accessible healthcare providers on campus who are really fantastic, really great student support through the Faculty of Medicine for any issues or just to try and facilitate you being your best self. And I think with all that around, and then living in Brisbane, it's a really easy and beautiful, warm place to sort of say fit and active. So I think both on campus and off campus, in your studies and out of your studies, there's a lot to support you in being well. That's really important.
Thank you, Rosie. And I think, you know, our medical dean, as you would be aware, is a psychiatrist by training. So the mental health of medical students has been a particular, you know, passion and interest of his. And we work very closely with the Central UQ Student Support Services. They have dedicated colleagues who spend time on all of our campuses to be accessible to medical students who are perhaps needing some additional support. And Cynthia, I'm wondering if you wanted to speak to that, whether you were aware of any of the additional services that are available. I think, you know, the US students, you know, have access to those services as well.
Yeah, so it's a very important topic, especially because for our class, we start off normally and then went into quarantine. And so a lot of people had a lot of struggles, and we all felt very well supported. UQ has really good counseling services, and they also had very strong academic support. And so a lot of students found it very easy to reach out and to like be heard and to get a response back very quickly. Compared to the US, it's definitely a lot different. It's a lot easier to get in contact, I would say, here. Versus in the US, you're often having to go pay out of pocket, maybe wait for a really long time. You're not going to have somebody who's consistent. So yes, I did really appreciate how easy it was and how they really want you to ask for help when you need it. So it's very much encouraged to to ask when you need it. And so they're really pushing that a lot. And I think in almost every email we get, they have links of support at the bottom, which is really helpful because you just don't know when you're going to need it. And it's just nice to know that it's always there. And a lot of people use it. And it really does help.
That's great. Thank you, Cynthia. And Kathy, I wonder if I could ask you to talk about another important aspect of health, and that's physical health, and talk about some of the sporting facilities that we have available at UQ.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. UQ has organized recreational sports leagues that you can join. Some medical students organize med teams to participate in them. I played beach volleyball last year in one of the social leagues with some of my med friends, and that was really fun. And I also played a bit of touch rugby, which is different than football back home. There are also many green spaces around the campus, which is really nice, and you can just use them whenever you'd like, bring a ball and go, yeah.
And I don't want to harp on our climate, but I think it obviously helps with, outside activities that generally the weather cooperates and you can, play all sorts of different sports outside. And is that been your experience, Kathy?
Oh yeah, for sure. The sunny weather, fantastic. Less conducive to study when you see the sun in the sky outside, but very good for your physical health.
Thank you. Rosie, we've already talked about the river ferries, the city cats that, go out to the UQ St. Lucia campus. I wonder if you could talk about some of the other public transport options in Brisbane, and also whether or not students can use public transport exclusively, or, should they think about getting a car?
Sure. I think the bus system is really fantastic. I used buses to get to and from uni, to and from the hospital all throughout first year. I was living in South Brisbane for first year as well, which is very accessible. We have a bunch of sort of guides on good suburbs to live in, both through our student society and as well as our partner society for the Oshner cohort. So we'll be sure to make sure you know where the great places are, or the easy places for public transport. But the bus system's really great. There's discounts for student tickets as well. I'm pretty sure it's half price, I can't remember. So it's affordable, and it's definitely how most students get to and from uni, but also to and from the hospital. And that's what I did a lot of the time. I did end up buying a car last year, which was mostly just to facilitate my roommates and I going to the coast as often as possible. But you can also get there on the train, so yeah.
Thank you. And Kathy, did you have any dramas buying a go-kart for public transport when you first got here? And do you know if most international students get a car, or if they utilize public transport?
I didn't have any troubles getting a go-kart. I think I got it the first day I arrived, just to get everything sorted. And I think you can get it from any convenience store as well. And then you just link it up online to your student account, and then you get the 50% off quickly. I think most of my international student friends didn't get a car the first year, just to see how things go. I also second Rosie in that the bus transport system here is so good. You can take one bus and get to every hospital site you need, straight from campus. Very easy. This year, I think most of my friends have gotten cars just to get to hikes and the coast and do all of those kind of things, and grocery runs. But I mainly use my housemate's car and friends to get to hikes and stuff, and that works perfectly fine.
Thank you. And Cynthia, I wonder if you can cast your mind back to those first hot, humid days in Brisbane, and adjusting to, obviously, in Australia, we drive on the left-hand side of the road.
Yeah, so I was actually surprised how quickly I got used to the driving on the other side of the road. I'm also a cyclist, and so I was really nervous at first that I would like turn into the wrong lane. But it really wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And when I went on that trip to Kent with my friends, like I was driving and we rented a van, and yeah, it really wasn't so bad. And the go-kart and public transport, everything is very user friendly. There's not a lot of public transport back in California, so I was a little nervous about the bus and the train, especially because I don't know if anybody knows what BART is in San Francisco, but it's not great. So when I heard people take the train a lot here, I was like, oh, I don't know. But yeah, it's so clean and everything's on time. So it worked out pretty well.
That's great, thank you. Rosie, you already talked about going to the beach, and I wonder what else you would suggest to incoming international students, things to see and do around Brisbane.
I think the Koala Sanctuary is a pretty high yield stop for international students in the first couple of weeks. You have to go and get your photo holding a koala so you can send it to all your friends and make them jealous, particularly with the beautiful blue skies and 30, 35 degree weather. It's important to rub that in your friends' faces. So I think Koala Sanctuary is pretty good, but there's so many. I think Australia has every kind of landscape that you can want. And during your time here, I would very much encourage everyone to sort of travel around Australia, get to the big cities, but also, you know, get out to the bush, see a little bit of everything. Because it's a really, I mean, I'm biased, but it's a really fantastic country and a really great opportunity if you happen to already be here for school.
Thank you. And I think it's important to note as well that all the koalas that you are able to hold and have your photo taken with, they are monitored quite closely so that they don't become distressed or tired. So there's a regular change of koalas. And all the money that's raised through the purchase of the photo and so on supports research into koala habitats and, you know, any health conditions that they have. Rose, before I go to one of our other students, Brian's just reminded me we want to ask you about the difference in the coffee culture between Melbourne and Brisbane, because this is obviously a big topic in Australia.
This is true. We take our coffee very seriously. I was entirely disappointed when I moved to Brisbane and was very let down by the coffee culture here. Melbourne is known for its fantastic coffees, but I've managed to assimilate. And now anytime that I go to visit Melbourne, it's just like gold elixir every time I have a coffee. So not as good here. That's one of the downsides, but I've managed to make it through despite all that.
So I'm going to let you get away with that because I would probably agree with you, but where we beat Victoria hands down every time is climate. So you can have your coffee culture and we will have our beautiful Sunshine State climate. Thank you very much. Cynthia, you mentioned that you live at South Brisbane, and I'm wondering if you've had a chance to, it's obviously been a challenge with the lockdown during the pandemic, but whether you had an opportunity to visit any of the museum, the art gallery, any of the performance space along the river.
Yeah, actually, I was able to get around quite a bit even during the lockdown. I went to the museum and we saw the spider exhibit like day one because my roommate and I, or housemate, wanted to keep an eye on which ones were poisonous or not. And so I highly recommend doing that because then you realize it's a lot safer. And then, yeah, we did check out the art gallery, and because I'm a cyclist, even during lockdown, I was able to go pretty far all over Brisbane and see, I saw a wild koala, which was pretty cool on a bike ride. I was just hanging out in the tree. I got really excited. And then I did go bike to the beach once. That was pretty fun. And we did go on some hikes up Mount Cootha, which is really close. You can take the bus there, actually, which was pretty nice. And we just kind of walked around and saw the view. Yeah, we've really made our way around town with all the different restaurants. So yeah, there's a lot to do. And even if you're on lockdown, you can order in some really delicious food. And we had a group that we like to make fondue together. So I highly recommend that.
That's great, thank you. We're going to go to some of the questions that have been coming in on chat line. We talked a little bit about public transport, and we have a question about the cost of public transportation. Kathy, did you maybe just want to talk about the student discount that students get and you know, some of the costs depending on how many zones you travel?
Yeah, I think it is 50% off. For me, I really only use it to go from uni to the hospital or down to the coast. And I think it's $1.75 for each trip that I've taken. If I go to the coast, I think it's like $5 if it's 50% off. I think if you take 8 trips within the week, it's 50% off the remainder of your trips for the week as well. So you can kind of factor that in if you're going to go for a longer trip, aka to the coast. Then it's cheaper that way. Just a little life hack. Otherwise, it's $1.75 each way for me within the city.
Thank you. And Rosie, we have a question about parking around campus, and I wonder if you can speak to, you know, some of the parking options at the main campus at St. Lucia.
Sure, there's a lot of parking, but there is a lot of competition as well. So it's cheap parking, but you do need to get there very early if you want it. I also don't think it's necessary to drive to uni just because the buses are so good. And we're really lucky in Brisbane that there's such good, affordable accommodation that is so close to campus. I mean, I was 10 minutes away on a bus. And so it's really not, I think it would take longer to drive and would cost more for parking than it does for the public, for the bus. So yeah, so there is parking, but it is competitive. I saw there was another comment around sort of, can you really go without a car for 2 years in Brisbane? And I want to say absolutely. I think everything is so close. I'm sort of 10 minutes to St. Lucia campus, which is the main campus, 10 minutes to the hospital that I'm at, and then it's 10 minutes into the city, which is kind of everything you need day to day. And then, as Kathy said, we have one car for our house of 4, which sort of helps us do the additional extras, but it's in no way necessary to get around.
And I think just on that, we also have a question asking about traffic, and obviously, you know, during the main stage of the lockdown, the traffic was quite light because as much as possible, people were staying home. We're in the, you know, various stages of, you know, returning to campus and so on. So traffic is getting heavier, but again, you know, we're not, people in Sydney have a reason to whinge about the traffic. In Brisbane, it's not as big an issue as it is in some of the other more populated cities like Sydney or Melbourne. Got a question here, I'm happy to take this one, asking about the international cohort. So about 40% of our overall medical school intake is international. And so we have the 2 streams. We have the UQ Ochsner MD, where students spend 2 years here with us in Brisbane, and then 2 years at the Ochsner Clinical School in New Orleans. And then we take another group of international students from all over, a lot of Canadians, and Singaporeans, Malaysians, and so on. And those students spend all 4 years with us here at UQ. And then the rest of our medical student cohort would be Australian students. We're getting lots of questions about budget, some specific questions about, you know, apartment costs or flats, what we would call apartments. And I think our panelists all shared, you know, their specifics about some of their accommodation options. Generally, what the university recommends is a budget of approximately 20,000 Australian dollars per year for living costs. And that should generally cover, you know, your rent, your food, entertainment, and so on. And again, it's going to come down to individual preferences, how many people you want to share with to bring costs down, how close you want to be with campus, you know, all those other factors. So don't lock yourself into thinking that's, you know, this is what amount you're going to spend. As we get closer to the commencement of you know, 2021, you'll be able to contact other students and find, you know, potential flatmates that way, and that'll help you really get a sense of what the costs are going to be. Got another question saying, does Uni by chance have a car share? that you would be able to use to go explore the country? I'm going to say a short no, but Kathy, I might ask you, just you talked about using, your housemate's car and that. Is that common in the medical student cohort? Do people tend to share rides and so on?
Yeah, because as an international student, you probably don't have a car here right away. We do usually just share with friends and go on trips with them. That way you also make friends, and you're forced to make friends because you need their car. Or at least that's kind of what I did, just don't tell them.
That's great, thank you. We're getting some questions about how long it takes to find accommodation, at what point, should students start looking or applying. Cynthia, you mentioned coming, a couple weeks before orientation, and other students coming right before orientation. Did you maybe want to talk a little bit more about your experience and the experience of some of your classmates?
Yeah. So I would say finding a 2-bedroom is very feasible. Finding a 3-bedroom is very challenging. And finding a house in the West End or someplace else is maybe a little more feasible. So just keep that in mind, because I think a lot of the US students came out trying to find a triple, and they just don't really have many of those. So if you're looking for a 2-bedroom, it can go, it took us a couple of weeks. It probably could have gone a little bit faster, but we kind of liked looking at all the places and we just kind of kept looking at some of the same places again. We're like, well, maybe this one, maybe this one. So yeah, it can go pretty fast. And then there's also a lot of new buildings in Brisbane. So they are building a lot. Like the building that we're in currently, we're the first tenants of this apartment. And so that's kind of nice. And so a lot of the things are just really new. So that also makes it go really fast because there's just all this space. But yeah, I would definitely give yourself time, and I would definitely start sooner rather than later. I maybe procrastinated a bit by not looking at any places before I got here, but because I got here like 2.5 weeks early, it was fine. So if you're getting here the day before, you definitely look some things up and have some, because you have to like book a viewing of an apartment, and sometimes those are like a week out. So make sure you book those well in advance, and that you know who you're rooming with before you book it. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to go back and look at it again and again, which is what happened to some friends because they had a bit of a roommate shuffle, and so their housing search was like a month and a half.
Thank you. Kathy, we're getting questions about furnished units, or how students source furniture, and I wonder if you could talk about your experience and maybe the experience of some of your classmates.
Yeah, my first apartment was furnished because I didn't really want to buy furniture if I didn't know I was going to live there for more than a year. And it costs a little bit more than unfurnished, but I think it's worth it just to get your feet on the ground. Yeah, I think, when I first came here, I went to a short-term accommodation and stayed there for 2 weeks. It only took me a week of searching to find a place, but we went to house inspections maybe 3 times a day on our bikes. And I highly recommend checking out a neighborhood before you sign that lease, because biking in some neighborhoods here, very hilly. Might not want to do that every day. In others, super flat, super nice right by the river. So yeah, just take a look at the neighborhood before you pick is my advice.
And Kathy, questions being asked about how you got international students get approval, for rentals. And was that a problem for you or any of your classmates?
Not for me. I think because I was a student, they wanted, I think, an agreement or something written from a parent or someone else on the lease as well. That might not be the case for everyone, but I've had to do that last year and this year, and that was fine. It's just a written sentence being like, they'll guarantee your rent. Yeah.
Thank you. And some questions are coming in asking if we provide housing information. So yes, as part of the acceptance documentation that the university sent you with during the offer process. There'll be links provided to the information that UQ provides around the accommodation options. Depending on which option you take, it really will dictate when you confirm accommodation. So if you want to look at on-campus accommodation, that's obviously an option, but just do not choose that as the default option because you think it's the easiest, because it is possible to find off-campus accommodation quite easily. And we don't assign flatmates to you or housemates. That's really something that you can connect with other students, either upon arrival or before you get here through some of the online opportunities that we have. The university provides airport reception, and so you will have someone from the university that would meet you at the airport. Temporary accommodation can also be pre-arranged, so at least you have someone to stay for the first few days that you're acclimatizing and then starting to look at more permanent accommodation options. Rosie, I wanted to come back to an earlier question we had, and the student was asking about working part-time when you're studying, and you also mentioned that you're doing the MD PhD, which I think is a pretty hefty option for students. But maybe talk about students that that are able to work part-time outside the program, and also I think we'd all be interested in hearing more about how you juggle an MD and a PhD.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm doing a slightly different pathway, which is a 6-year program, which means that I take 2 years off med school in the middle to do full-time research. That's what I'm currently doing. I get a little as a PhD stipend, so I get some money to sort of support myself throughout that process, given that it's pretty significant and working on top of that isn't so feasible. Many students do work part-time to support themselves through the program. A lot of people have previous careers that they rely on as well. So a lot of people who did pharmacy or nursing do a couple of shifts a week to sort of supplement their income. I would say, I think when you're first settling in, if it's at all feasible for the first probably semester, I think trying to budget yourself so that you don't have to work in that period is preferable, because it is a pretty significant load to get used to med school, get used to a new place. But students do work part-time, be that hospitality, working in a bar, kind of whatever they need for their budgets. In terms of my PhD, I have done it, as I said, full-time for this year and next year. And then for the rest of my medical school, I do research concurrently alongside, outside of med school. So I'm doing a full-time load of med school and then a half-time load of research, which is engaging and exciting and hard work. But I think everyone, is trying to do research these days, and kind of putting a bit of structure to it has been really great for me. Yeah.
Thank you. And Kathy, obviously international students are able to work part-time as a condition of their student visa. Are you aware of any international students that are working part-time and what kind of roles they might have?
I actually don't know very many international students that are working part-time. But I do know that you can, and I have thought about it to supplement my lack of income, especially because a lot of us have worked previously, and not having an income plays a large role in my mental health every day. But I am here for medical education, and I personally chose to focus on that in the last couple of years, as well as volunteer opportunities and stuff. Yeah.
Can I add to that one, just while you're on it, in terms of visas? The international student visa has a maximum of 20 hours a week, is my understanding. So there are a couple of limitations on hours, but I think what that work can be is pretty open.
Yes, and I think it's an important message from both Kathy and Rosie. Obviously it is a big investment. You're paying full fees to study medicine at UQ as an international student. And the challenge is trying to balance, the rigors of attending medical school, any kind of part-time work. And the international students that have previously worked at the same time, as Rosie had mentioned, some students come into the program from other careers, and so they perhaps have had, previous experience, and they're able to carry that through with some part-time work. But it is, medical school is a more than full-time commitment. So if you are able to fund your education without working, I think that probably gives you the opportunity to focus on medical school. We have a question about scholarships. So Rosie mentioned the stipend she gets as a PhD student, and generally in Australia, the only types of scholarships that are usually available are for any sort of research at the PhD level. It's not common in Australia for universities to have institutional financial aid, which I know is quite common, particularly in the US. And so the majority of our international students who come into the program are on some form of their home country financial aid or bank loans and so on. Got a question here about asking if it's possible to apply for the MD PhD program in the middle of the MD program. And Rosie, did you maybe just want to talk quickly about your application process?
Sure, that's exactly what I did. I was doing volunteer research throughout my first year of med, and was offered a PhD from my then supervisor, which I was really lucky for. So you can apply. When you arrive, you'll hear all about the different pathway options for doing research, either as an additional degree or just as a volunteer position. And that'll be part of orientation. So don't stress too much about it now, because they'll help you once you get here.
Thank you. I'm going to ask all of our student panelists to provide some final remarks. And Cynthia, I'm going to start with you. And what I'd like to ask you to end with is, was there anything unexpected when you arrived in Brisbane that you wish you'd known about before you came to UQ?
Yeah, so when you arrive in January, it'll be really hot and humid, like just very much so. I was coming from the snow and I knew it would be warm, but I really underestimated that. I brought all these jeans with me and jackets, and I had to go buy shorts like my first day. So just anticipate that. Don't do what I did. And as far as the transition of finding a place and starting med school and research and jobs and all that, just, one thing at a time, one day at a time. It does all fall into place pretty quickly. Although when you first get here, it's going to be very overwhelming. It's going to be lots of information thrown at you, and just, it does come together, and then you'll look back and be like, wow, I was really stressed about that for no reason. Yeah, and just try and have a lot of fun when you first get here and meet all your classmates. They're going to be your best support system, and I highly recommend living in South Brisbane. It's really nice, and all your Oshner friends are going to be nearby. But yeah, I really hope you guys all come out. It's a really lovely place to be.
Thank you, Cynthia. Rosie, you mentioned that your housemates are international medical students. So I wonder, did they share any stories from their first, few days or few weeks in Brisbane about things that they hadn't been expecting?
I think we all actually met in the week prior to school starting, because sort of everyone that's new to Brisbane just posts on the big Facebook page for the year group and says, does anyone want a friend? Because I need many. And so I think that was, really nice to know. I was pretty nervous about moving somewhere where I didn't know anyone, and I was only moving across Australia. So I think knowing that everyone that you are going to meet wants to make friends, everyone needs a support network, so it happens really, really fast. And I think from sort of the domestic perspective, my boyfriend is Canadian, my two housemates are North American. I saw there was a question about what you do in your breaks, and I was with my partner's family in Canada for the Christmas last year. So I think for me, it was really fantastic to meet so many people from overseas and to make so many connections overseas. But I think similarly for the international students coming here, getting to experience an entirely different culture, pretty fantastic culture, if I do say so myself, is just such a privilege that a lot of medical schools don't have. We have the most international students by a long way. So there's a lot of support, but also a really great opportunity to meet lots of different people. And Tim Tams are fantastic, to the question there. You need a bite. A Tim Tam is a chocolate biscuit, and it's about this big. And if you bite 2 corners off each end, then you can drink hot chocolate through it like a straw. And that's called a Tim Tam slam. And you will learn this next year.
Thank you, Rosie, and I think it would be no exaggeration to say that pretty much every Australian household would have Tim Tams in the cupboard. Kathy, I'm going to ask you for final remarks. We do have one last question asking how many weeks of break we have during first year. So if you wanted to maybe speak to, some of the vacation time, but then also share some comments about anything that was unexpected for you when you first arrived in Brisbane.
Yeah, I was also enlightened by the Tim Tam Slam in my first year and experience. I'll let you guys experience that when you get here. Vacation time, the times we look forward to throughout our studies. There's 2 intra-semester breaks. So within your semester, you get a week off, and you can use that I usually use that to travel within Queensland and its surrounds because it's a week. And then there's an inter-semester break of 2 weeks, and I used that to go to New Zealand, South Island last year on a road trip and do hikes and ski and stuff. And then there's, I think, 2 months between your first and second year, maybe 2.5. But I did my observership for a month in Australia, and then I went home for a month before coming back here. Home is Canada. So plenty of time to see the sights around. I also utilize every weekend I have to also go travel. What I was surprised by was humidity, same as Cynthia. I came off of the plane onto the tarmac and I was profusely sweating because I also came from rain and snow in Vancouver. Yeah, I think UQ was a great place to meet friends and build that support system. I think that was my #1 priority moving over from Canada, is to build a solid support system. And there are many events that you can go to within your first few months. You might get a bit tired of them, but you will meet many wonderful people. Yeah, that's it. I hope you guys have a good time when you come.
Thank you very much. And as we say thank you to our student representatives, Rosie, Kathy, and Cynthia, they acknowledge that they are part of the student leadership group that works very closely with the Faculty of Medicine, executive leadership, and help us refine any support or administration that students require during their medical program. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone attending. If you have any more specific questions, please feel free to send them through by email. And we will be doing, similar webinars between now and the end of the year. If you have more questions, please, feel free to come along to this webinar. We've also recorded it so you can watch it back after we're finished. Thank you, Rosie, Kathy, and Cynthia, and thank you to everyone who attended. Bye-bye.